Hello and welcome everyone to today's Chinese Corner. My name is George and I'm joined by Suzanna Tan, who is very kindly giving us her time. Suzanna, you are an executive coach and author, and we're going to give you a real introduction in a moment. But just before we begin, I will do my due diligence, as it were. I work for the Confucius Institute, and we are organizing these series of talks. We are part of Coventry University, and our mission is to promote and share Chinese language and culture across the West Midlands. So as part of that, we run a series of Mandarin Chinese classes, which are available for anyone of any level, whether you are student, staff, or members of the public. And we also run and offer cultural experiences and classes for local schools. And also we are always willing and able to support local businesses in any of their dealings with China. If you have questions or you have suggestions, anything you would like to get in touch with us, please email us at confuciusinstitute@coventry.ac.uk. And please consider following us on our social media for updates of our upcoming events. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook @ConfuciusCovUni. So with this out of the way, today, Suzanna, welcome. Thank you for coming, Suzanna Tan, author and executive coach. So before we get into the content, what is an executive coach, Suzanna? What does that mean?
Thank you, George. Thank you for inviting me. An executive coach, right? So the majority of executive coaching is done with middle and senior managers or executives in the business world or corporates. And what we do is we work with people on either their careers, leadership skills, whatever it is they want to work on, and we help them move forward in whatever way they need to move forward in. So it's actually coaching, and coaching is a type of approach where you work with that client to work on whatever their goals and needs are. And I'm an executive coach because my background is 25 years in financial services in the corporate world, and that's where I've had the majority of my career. The last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of executive coaching in Barclays, where I worked for 20 odd years. And then I decided to come out as a freelance coach and do it myself, working with middle senior managers, majority across the world now, which is great. And it's mainly the main focus of my coaching is careers, because people come to me because they want to work on their careers, which leads me in nicely to how I got to work with students from China and students at universities. So I left Barclays about 3 years ago, and about 2 years ago, students from China just started contacting me and asking me to help them with their careers, because they maybe saw my website or saw me around campus at Warwick University, where I was doing my master's. And it was an interesting journey, because I didn't realize, I don't know why, but I didn't realize why there were so many Chinese students in the UK. And at Warwick University, that's one of the universities where there are a lot of students, Chinese students in Coventry as well. So through working with them on a one-to-one basis, I got really interested in wanting to help them struggle a little less when they're in the UK. And also, Birmingham University asked me to do a stint of work with them, working with their students in their business school, and just so happened that 90% were Chinese students as well. They did a lot of one-on-one work, group work with them, and since then have been, these Chinese students have been working with me. And what I do is, I actually, in terms of coaching, it's not so much coaching that I do with them, it's more information, advice and guidance. Working with universities as well, so always signposting them to universities, because they actually provide a real comprehensive range of services to help students with their careers. My approach actually takes it a step back, and I'm going to go through this in this talk today, this discussion today, and I'd love to hear everybody's opinions on this and what your experiences are. But where I come from is actually taking it back, looking at it a bit more holistically, and seeing how I can actually support these students socially, emotionally and academically as well, so that they've got a great foundation to actually build a platform to build their careers on and actually start preparing for their careers. So that's the space that I work in with them. And that's the space that I'm passionate about with these Chinese students. So that's a brief background of how I've come to working with Chinese students.
Excellent. So that was the executive coach question. The next question is, of course, as an author, I have a copy of your book here. And of course, we're here, and I will for our audience. This is interesting. And why did you come to write about this topic? I mean, you said you were talking to the Chinese students, but what provided the impetus to then decide that you're going to write this guide, and what's the background and purpose of the book?
Yeah, so I felt that I was having the same conversations with students over and over again, and I really felt there was a gap in where students were didn't have the stuff that's in my book, which covers a few of the culturally sensitive things that they go through, which isn't actually covered at university in the UK or actually beforehand in China, because there are different elements in the student experience or the journey that they go through, and everyone has their not to say agenda, but their tasks that they need to do. And that transition phase, there is information out there, but there's no information in an easy to find and easy to use format. And Chinese students were getting overwhelmed when I was speaking to them. They feel overwhelmed when they come to the UK. They've worked all their student life to actually get to this point, to get to the UK, and then coming here, it's such a culture shock. It's such a challenge for them that it would be great if they could be a bit more prepared. So I was looking at a way of doing it in a really kind of influencing or providing the information to as many students as possible, so that they would struggle less when they got here. And I did lots of customer research with students as well, and with careers practitioners at universities, to find out what the best process would be. Would it be a blog? Would it be online information? And actually it boiled down to just a simple guide, a simple book that they could easily read, that wasn't complicated, and just had step by step what they should prepare for, what they need to be aware for, and what they can do to give them that platform when they come here, so they just know what to do. Does that, yeah?
Yes, I mean, so the idea of this is a practical guide, is rather than an academic source book idea. This is something that students can look through, and as I say, you've looked at, so basically it's in two parts from my understanding. So we've got the first part, which is a sort of preparation for university for students in China. What can they do? What are the differences? And you've laid it all out rather well to say, practicing reading, practicing, preparing for the differences, and tips on friendship and etiquette, things like this in the first half. But the second half, you delve more into the career preparation side, which is perhaps, I think, where we're going to be looking at more today. I think there's a lot of different universities approach these in different ways, but I think it's great to have your background in the experience. And just as a reminder to everyone watching, this is available through Amazon. So
and all good bookstores as well. Waterstone.
All good bookstores. Amazon. Search for Suzanna Tan. Obviously, we're going to be saying home. Bookstores may be out of reach for a while.
Yes.
and it is very useful for a guide. And I should, as a quick note, my wife has contributed a small amount to this book.
She has. Thank you.
Very useful. So with that in mind, I'd like to remind everyone who's joined us, thank you for coming again. Please, if you have any questions or would like to participate, please join us in the chat, and with any questions, comments, or anything that you would like to contribute. Thank you very much. So Suzanna, I believe you have some slides that you'd like to share with us about this.
Yes. Can you see them?
Yes. I think.
Lovely. Right. So today we're here just to talk about how us in the UK can continue to be a destination of choice for students from China. And I'm just going to take you through my thoughts on it. And I'd love everybody just to participate by commenting or asking questions or sharing what their experiences are. And there's two areas that we're going to look at. And the first one is around the key cultural differences that affect students' well-being, personal development and career preparation. So that's around what I've seen through working with these students, through talking to them, through the research I've done, what actually are the things that are impacting them and making them be in the position that they are in when they come to the UK. And then how actually that plays out in terms of why they have the experience they may have. And I'm talking generally here, not every student will have this same experience. There are different sorts of students that come, but I'm talking generally with the majority of students. And the second bit we're going to look at actually is more of the discussion areas, how we, as people working with these students, can enhance and change the way we support our students so that they get better outcomes, so that we can support these students and the parents that send them here in understanding that the UK is a great place for them to be for university. So taking the first part, the key cultural differences, and I'm going to, there are loads of cultural differences, but I'm going to highlight a few that I come across all the time, and that where it stems from these students. And we'll take it back and we'll cover a few things actually. We're going to cover why students come to the UK. Also, we're going to think about in China, what students experience when they are a student, and then what do they experience when they come to the UK. But the UK is such a great destination for them. It's one of the top destinations every year. Last year it was 120,000 students that came. We want to continue making sure that students come to the UK. It's good for business, for UK. But I think what's happened during the recent COVID situation is that universities actually realize how much they rely on students from China to come to their universities, not only for the income, but for their university population. Some universities have even 30% of their income coming from these students. And what we need to do, I think, is to protect that as a country, especially if, as the education minister and government want us to increase the number of students, international students, to 600,000 by 2030. We've got to continue being a great destination for them and showing parents and students that we are. And I like to think about it, there's lots of things we can do in terms of politically, universities can do lots of things, but I kind of take it right back again and put it towards outcomes. And I look at it from the viewpoint of the student, how they feel, how they can personally develop and how they can actually prepare for their careers. So, the key reasons why students come to the UK is we provide a great education for them. This is historical. We've always provided good education, and that's why we are one of the top destinations for students from China and the rest of the world. The second one is it's an alternative route. There are millions of students in China, 8 million graduates in the marketplace last year in China. This is an alternative route. It's so competitive in China. We know they go through the Gaokao system. It is really, really difficult for them to get into a great university. And so this is actually another alternative way for them to get a great education by coming to the UK and choosing the great universities we have. And a lot of parents, especially those that are more affluent, are able to do that for their students. So it's an alternative route rather than studying in China. They also want to come here and experience the culture and the people, living in the UK, the history, improving their English while they're here because it's an international language. So these are a lot of the reasons why students say they want to come here as well, experiencing making friends, the multicultural environment that the UK has to offer as well. But in reality, the basic reason they're coming here is to enhance their employability prospects. You're coming to the UK to get that degree, to enhance your employability prospects. But there's a bit more to it than that as well in order to enhance employability prospects. So I think that takes me on to a few of the cultural influences that I see on students. These are the things that they that drive the way they are, that drive their behaviors, that drive their thinking. And family is the key thing. obviously based on Confucian thinking, you know, the Chinese culture. It's all about harmony, listening to your parents. Your parents actually, a lot of the time, will decide your career path or your university path. Nowadays, in the modern society, there is more two-way conversations. The students do get a bit of a chance to discuss what their interests are and the choices they want to make, which is great. But at the end of the day, parents overall make that decision for the students. Also, the 4-2-1 situation is a real key thing for students. They're only children. The majority of the students that come here are going to be only children, and this impact of them having the family's hopes on them actually puts a lot of stress on these students, I feel. So you've got the 4 is the 2 sets of grandparents that they have, the 2 is the parents that they have. This is all on the student. Whilst they're brought up in China, grandparents are involved in bringing them up, the parents are involved. Everything is based around the student, but that brings a lot of pressure to them because they are the ones that are sent away to university, expected to get a good education so they can come back, get a good job, or stay in the UK and get a good job. So a lot of stress on these students because of that. And touching on collectivism, this concept is where you know, people in China, it's all about the group, the whole group society versus individualism. So in the West, we think about the individual more from the point of view of making decisions, the point of view of deciding what you want to do in life. Collectivism is more like you don't want to stand out from the group, you want to fit in with the group. So that really, I think that's important to understand, because when students come here, it's a very different situation where we expect them to be independent, we expect them to be individuals, and if they've been brought up with this, it's really a big shock and a change for them. Faith and respect, faith, you know, not losing. Faith is a big thing in China, and I mean, a big thing in my culture, being Chinese. You know, not wanting to be embarrassed, not wanting to have anything like that happen. So I think this, to me, this is about when they're in the UK, when they're in class or in lectures or workshops, they don't really want to stand out. They don't want to be questioned. It's quite a difficult concept for them, expressing their opinions and having the risk of somebody debating it with them or whatever. It's quite a difficult concept. So that's a real thing that, you know, sometimes they might steer away from saying things or being in a certain way because they don't want to lose face, they don't want to feel embarrassed. And hierarchy is an important thing as well. In China, there is a clear hierarchy wherever you go, whether you're in education, in work, family. That hierarchy is really important. You respect your elders, you should respect your line managers, your teachers, and you listen to them, and you take what they say as the way it's going to be. So that also is such a difference to how it is in the UK, where there is hierarchy in certain organizations, of course, and there is that hierarchy there, but it's more of a level playing field where you can ask, you can question, you can debate. Is very different. So I think these are the few important things that we need to bear in mind when these students come to the UK. I'm going to pause there to see whether there's any comments or questions from anyone.
Well, I'm happy to jump in because I think from my own experience, these are very, very important. Obviously, you say with the 4-2-1 situation is something that we don't necessarily think about. We know in the West, everyone's very aware of the one-child policy, but they seem to forget that in previous generations, that was because there were many siblings, and was the norm in the family. So I would add there's also a lot of, depending, there is some gender influence there, and depending on the pressures, there is also pressure from not only your parents, but there may well be pressure perhaps from uncles and aunts, and the idea of the family, the pressure and the influence from members of the extended family is much is much seems to be much greater than we would expect in the UK. And I think it's and it certainly was a surprise for myself joining a Chinese family to see how the whole family would focus on one nephew or niece, especially if I came in when I was first engaged to my lovely wife. We had a sort of engagement meal, and there was my wife's cousin was in high school at the time, and all of her uncles and aunts, grandparents, made her quite unhappy by saying, "There's an English guy, go and speak to him," in her lunch break from this one. And so from that moment, I would always see, when I went to see the family and she would see me, there was a sort of slump of the shoulders, like, oh no, I know what I'm going to get from everybody. The pressure is really real. But thank you, Simon. There was a question from Simon. So do you think they come here because they want the voice of debate, or are they not really expecting or wanting them? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And from my experience, I don't think they expect it. They know that it's here. You know, they know that it's a freer, they have freedom of speech and all that, but they don't realize actually how difficult it is to actually change their way of being to actually do that as well. So the expectation, you know, in classes, even in one-to-ones, when you're having career conversations with them, when you're asking them questions, it's quite scary for them to actually think on the spot, to actually express what they feel, because they're not used to having the option to do this. Or if they have, I mean, I think it's starting to change, but I think it's still, this has been brought up for how many years, 20 odd years this way. It's very difficult to suddenly switch and express your opinions. I mean, even for students, UK students, home students, when you go to university, it's a very different style of teaching already for home students who have been used to expressing opinions. So I think it can be quite a shock to them.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'll jump in and add to this one. Obviously, I was in my previous role, I was fortunate to be able to set up a syllabus at a Chinese university partner in the Swapper partner, and the core overarching learning goal of the students for the students, excuse me, was around speaking out and discussion. So we had them for 3 years of so they had maybe, I think it was about about 4 hours a week of just speaking classes for smaller groups over the first year, and that would a bit less. But we hadn't spent a lot of time focusing on this specific aspect of preparing for joining in seminars for legal students. And even after the 3 years, some of the students loved it. I mean, some of the students were very, very engaged and very interested, but still after this time, there was still that leap to suddenly not just speak to each other, but the difference between speaking English to other non-native speakers and suddenly being put into a situation where you're speaking with a group of native speakers, and the crosstalk, the interruptions, the speed of speech, it's very difficult, which is as Simon says, the language problem, that step up in language, of the difficulty in language, of crosstalk, interruption, cultural references. We forget the cultural references that are not that don't translate perfectly, and the humor. So that in and of itself, the English language thing is a large barrier, and that has a further step onto, again, integration with the wider student community. And again, that can look into the face. So there's not just the worry about, am I going to say the wrong thing? It's, will I fail? Will I say the wrong language? There's a difficulty up and down the board, and I don't think there's a great answer. There is a question that come through. Let me just open up the question. Anonymous question. Great. What can students do to gain confidence to speak up? So
yeah, so I actually have a whole chapter in my book around English fluency, because it's the first chapter. Yeah, it's the first chapter, because this is the foundation. If they don't have this, you know, passing your IELTS or whatever examination they need to do to get to the UK, you know, to get on a course isn't enough. It's about that preparation before they come. And they have English classes of throughout their education, but the English that you hear in the UK is very different. There's accents, there's the English slang that's used. Lecturers or academics use different language to everyday social interactions with other students. So I think there's a range of things they need to do to prepare their English to improve their English before they come to the UK. And the simple things that teachers might say is like, watching programs, listening to music, all these things, buddying up with someone that is an English speaker to help them with that. Those are the sorts of things that are really going to help. But when they're here, to fully immerse themselves in it, and it's difficult because there are so many other students from China in their halls, in their courses, that it's difficult to get those chances to actually go out and meet other people, and even forget where we are in this pandemic at the moment, because a lot of it's online and they have those restrictions, but forget about that. But in the normal university life, it's difficult for them to. So it's about pushing themselves to go and join that club or society, to get that voluntary work, whatever it is. I had one student that her English in 3 months improved so dramatically because she actually went and got work experience at an old people's home, and through speaking to old people on 2 hours a week on a Sunday, her English by when I saw her again 3 months later was brilliant. She had more confidence in speaking. And I remember her saying to me that she didn't mind so much about her accent anymore or her grammar. It was just having more confidence to talk, and she didn't mind making mistakes anymore because she got used to talking. So I think it's just fully immersing themselves when they're here as well, but that's difficult, I know.
Yeah, I think there are ways we can look at supporting that through, and I think if we're looking at the university support, perhaps we're looking at that later on. But one of the ways that we've tried to do in the past that I think is good is making a more sort of organized effort to match incoming students with home students. So whether that's through sort of mentoring programs, whether that's through buddy systems, whichever way we look to try to do that, I think those are one key methods to try to not simply encourage students, but to provide a very specific avenue of, here is a person that you can speak to, here is a peer that is going to give you some contact perhaps before you come. But that's quite a difficult thing to do. There is I'm going to move on to the next one from Mark. We have a question wondering, a very interesting question again, when with this relating to the employability. So thank you, Marco. So do you have any notion, based on your experience, of whether Chinese students going back to China can bring with them some of the new approaches or ideas that might lead to different interaction with supervisors, or how they would interact with others higher up in the hierarchy?
So do you mean, Marco, do you mean if they're going back to university? Sorry,
I'm apologies, Marco, if I'm misinterpreting. Do you think that Chinese students are bringing back these different ideas when they go back to the UK? Would they interact differently with their line manager, for example, or would they bring a different approach to meetings, whereas home students might not speak up in the meeting with an opinion because they don't?
I see what you mean. Sorry. Yeah. I think it really depends on the organisation they go back to work for. So if they're working for an international organisation in China who has a lot of international business, I think there is the opportunity for them to do that. There is that piece of work that was done, I can't remember what, standing in, fitting out, I think it was called, a few years ago, where they researched employers as well in China. There is that, I think, depending on how confident the student is when they go back into the workplace and their culture in that organization, I think that's something that could stop them from bringing back these amazing skills that they can learn over here. But there are definitely those organizations in China that are going to want these type of skills, these problem solving skills, these creative thinking skills, this proactive agility, all that sort of stuff. There are definitely organizations that are going to be recruiting for those specific skills, so they can bring those back. But I do think it is dependent on the organization the student work, the person goes back to work for, because the culture is so important in that organization. And that going back, you know, faith, hierarchy, fitting back in, that collectivism, that all comes into it again.
Yes, thank you. Simon says it's probably quite difficult to tap into what happens back in China, perhaps for some students. And I think that's, again, when we're taking a short, sort of very generalized view, there are very big differences. We see them in different students. As I've mentioned, my students from the law school who have had a they've had a lot of cultural preparation. They've had internships in China. They have an internship in the UK. They have all of this sort of confidence of coming through. Whereas we've got other students who might not have so much support beforehand, other students who haven't had experience through internships. It can be quite difficult. And especially I know I've heard from some of our support, some of our teams who aren't very confident in giving advice or support about what to expect coming back into China. And I think that can be something of a difficulty as well, when many universities might not be able to prepare or might not feel confident in trying to support a student into the workplace in China. So, and I think that's something we can look at later. Well, okay. That's coming up next.
Shall I move on? Thank you, everybody. That was great. Right. So I'm going to touch on quite briefly what it's like to be a student in China. And I know that there was another one of your presentations which touched on that. But from the students I work with, education and achieving is such a priority for them. It's all about education. You know, when you talk to students, they are very, very focused on getting their academic qualifications. Sorry, I've just gone backwards. Let me just go backwards. The next thing is long hours and heavy content. Chinese students actually spend a lot of time in China working, studying. They might start at 7 o'clock in the morning, finish at 11 o'clock. They've got their school lessons, then they go home. And then they have tuition as well. And then on weekends, they might have extra study. So it's all based around studying. Their lives are very much focused on studying because they need to achieve. The other thing is it's rote learning as well in China. A lot of the time they have academic textbooks for their subjects. They learn it. And there are kind of like model answers to ways of passing exams or doing assessments. And that's why they're not used to, being in China, they're not used to doing the reasoning, the bringing lots of sources together, because the academic text that they're set, that is what they use, and that gives them the answers for their exams, to pass their exams. So it's a different way of learning. And the teacher support that they get in China is different to the support they get here. Here we expect them to be very, students to be quite self-directed. In China, students are there to support them. That's why that they can ask their teachers anything. The teachers are there all the time. They can ask them for any support they want. And that's why you see in the UK, when they come here, you'll often see Chinese students queuing up at the end of lectures to ask the academics questions, because they expect that that's the way it works in China. You know, they've got that time, but they don't realize that here actually there's probably another lecture for that academic to go to, or that's that time isn't there for this sort of similar support. And yeah, creativity and critical thinking, that is something that's starting to come through in the teaching in China, but it's really early days. And I think that's China trying to look at ways to adapt their education a bit, but it's still early days. So they're not used to doing this. And because of the long hours, they have limited extracurricular activities. They don't have the time for it. Yes, they do try and fit it in, but they have very limited time for this. So they don't build that up. Whereas here in the UK or other countries, you have time for extracurricular activities, because your school day is your school day. You come home and then you do your homework or do your extracurricular stuff. You don't have tuition and all that sort of stuff. So briefly I've touched on what it's like to be a student in China. And then I'm going to go to what it's like being a student when they're at a UK university. And this is the difference. This is where it's quite a shock to them, and there's a bit of a change. So the reality will have some unintended consequences for the student. And the first thing which we've touched on is the language limitations. So I had one actually, my cousin actually said to me after he read my book, he came from Hong Kong to the UK 20 odd years ago, and he said when he had good grasp of English, but when he came here, he said he felt like he was having an English lesson all day, and how taxing that was on him. It was such a shock for him that he found he struggled with the English, and the consequence of that is students here end up being being not able to improve their English to the expectation that they hoped they would have done. Didn't explain that very well. So they expect to come to the UK, improve their English, but when they come here, if they haven't got that baseline foundation to actually start pushing their English and start improving it, it's going to be very difficult for them to do it when they're here. They can do it when they're here, but it's making sure they get into those circles, they continue to focus on improving their English so that they can continue to do it here, because a lot of them do give up, and they go back not improving their English as much as they'd hope. The second thing is the culture shock. They come over here, and not only have they got to grapple with the weather, the food, the way of living, the customs here that is totally different to China, they are in university where they didn't realize that there were going to be so many students from China. Many of my students, when they come, they're shocked that, for example, the school that they're in may have a large representation of Chinese students, and then it's much easier for them to it's important for students to have that support network from other Chinese students, but it's very easy for them to just revert into those networks and not go out of them. And if you look at universities, and especially the main universities where Chinese students are, there are mini Chinatowns in there, where there are Chinese restaurants, Chinese food stores, which is all great, but then they don't actually get outside of that bubble as much, because it's very easy to stay in that bubble. So the consequence is that they stay in that Chinese bubble, which has been talked about a lot. Social challenges are another thing. In the UK, making friends is the etiquette of making friends is very different to back in China. They are very, in China, a lot of the time, they're not given the opportunity to be independent. You come here, you're expected to be independent. You live in your own room. You're expected to cook for yourself, to look after yourself. And it can be quite difficult for Chinese students. So what happens is they feel quite isolated. They can feel quite, I think this is quite a big well-being issue, actually, that we're finding, that Chinese students come here, and it might not have been so bad 10, 15 years ago when there were less Chinese students, but they feel isolated in their bubble of, they don't go out of that Chinese bubble. And a lot of the time, the other students as well don't integrate well with Chinese students. So there's that as well. We've touched on the different teaching and studying. A lot of students are actually high achievers in China, and they come here and there's a different style of studying, and suddenly the first few modules that they may do, they really struggle, and academically they've never had this before, where they've struggled and not been able to not being able to achieve the results they achieve by putting in the long hours and studying the way that they used to, and that causes all sorts of issues. I think that you hit the ground running when you come to university. There's no time for them to acclimatize to this new teaching style. So I know universities provide great study support workshops, such as how to write an essay or how to do your academic reading. But those in themselves are quite difficult for these students as well, even though when they attend it, it's quite difficult for them to even make that step change. And obviously they spend a lot of time studying. You know, when I ask students, you know, what else do you do in your time? What do you do in your spare time? They don't have any spare time because they're studying. I have students that they record their lectures and they listen to it over and over again because they're trying to understand what's going on. Or they're one student, they translate the reading into Chinese and then translate, you know, it all takes time. It's all very time consuming and not effective. So what happens is they don't have time to do other things that we expect and need them to do to prepare for their careers, such as get interest, get that work experience or voluntary work, because they're spending all their time trying to do the basics, which is getting their degree, which is why they're here. And then another thing is that I've noticed that universities, looking at a lot of what universities' careers information, advice and guidance provides them, we provide them with a lot of things as soon as they come, especially if you're a postgraduate student, which 65% of the Chinese students that come are. They're in that first autumn term, getting used to all these things that I've talked about, and they've got to apply for a job. If they want to stay in the UK and get a job in the UK, autumn term is when you apply for graduate roles. Things are being thrown at them, graduate careers fairs, employer events, workshops on CVs, on assessment centres, whatever it may be. It's all being thrown at them at this time. And what happens is they either steer away from it and don't know what to do, or they go to everything, but it's not effective and they don't really have the basics. So they might be looking at writing a CV, but they don't have all the basics like the interest, the work experience and the voluntary work with soft and hard skills to put on their CV. So what happens is they're not focusing effectively on what they need to do for their career. And then being career ready, touched on that, is they lack soft and hard skills. They lack the attributes, or they might have them, but they don't know how to translate them into helping them with the job application process. And this all impacts their well-being, their personal growth, and obviously impacts their ability to successfully prepare for their career. And I'm going to stop there before I go into the next, because I'm noticing we've only got 15 minutes left. Yes. So
I think we could talk about this for a long time. Just a quick clarification. We've been asked, in what ways do you feel that the students don't integrate so well with other Chinese students? I think that might be a misunderstanding. I think you're saying that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the idea is that Chinese students very much like to, or it's easy for Chinese students to integrate with other Chinese students.
Yes.
To the extent that that's when we find that China bubble, where we often see groups of Chinese students, they would live together, eat together, see each other after class. So they're speaking Chinese to one another when they're not in the language, which in and of itself is normal. We see that with every national group. They will find themselves speaking their language, whether that's British people abroad, whether that's anyone. That's normal. That's normal and natural, and it makes sense. I think the challenge that we face as universities is trying to get them out of the bubble of Chinese to integrate with whether it's social groups, sports networks, academic support, and all of the other places. Is that fair to say?
That is fair. And I must say that I want to share this one experience with one student. She actually was going out there and meeting other students. She actually told me that she was really upset because her Chinese friends didn't like the fact that she was going out and being seen as the one that was going out and making friends with other students. So there's that pressure as well. I think that's the collectivism, that pressure there on her, that she said that I feel like I'm snubbed. They don't like me to go out and make friends with other students. So there is that impact as well. So much as we can do a lot as well, we've got to try and influence Chinese students. And I'm not saying every Chinese student, but we've got to try and influence Chinese students to think a bit differently as well, to really embrace meeting other people and making friends, and not be mean to people that do. Because this student of mine, she was really upset that she was trying to do it but felt pulled back to that Chinese bubble.
I think that's a very interesting point. I've not heard that from students before, but I think that we can certainly see that happening. Someone wants, if people feel pressure on themselves that other people are perhaps seem to be doing better or seem to be doing the things that are not expected. I think that's it's easier to pull back someone than to try to raise yourself.
Yeah. So are there any other comments before I move on?
I think we've got a question. I think that's great. I think we've got, say, looking at how the Chinese students work. So remember, should we move forward? As you say, we're already, maybe we can speak all, I'm happy to speak all day, but we do have a time limit about this thing. So remember, if we do have questions, please put them into the comments or the question box anytime, and I'll interrupt and when possible the question to ask.
Okay, so moving on to the next bit about how we can enhance and adapt our current support for students from China. I'm going to look at this from two aspects. So the student journey, so the support they get in China first, and then the support they get in the UK, which I have touched on actually, because we can see there the key areas that different people are helping the students with, and then maybe start to see the gaps and where we can do a bit more or adapt our approaches. So in China, obviously parents play a key part here. They're choosing the best universities that their children can get into, the right degree, and they are really absolutely keen and very I can't find the word, very well, they put the well-being of their child at the heart of it as well. They absolutely want that, so they do that. And then we have agencies in China, and agencies, we know that they help information, advice and guidance on the university choices that the students are making, helping them put together applications to get them through to university. But it's very much a process of getting them through that process rather than anything else, like to help them with their transition. And the universities in China also help students go to other universities in the UK. And we have UK universities partnering with China agencies. We have China offices from UK universities also providing all this support to help students get into a degree and get onto a course in the UK. So very briefly, that's the support in China that they get, and it's very much on the logistical elements of getting to the UK. And then in the UK, the support in the university, which I've already touched on some of it, you've got the international teams that provide great logistical information, helping them, the right to come and study here, helping them with arrivals, accommodation, all the logistical elements. Mental health and well-being teams here, which are brilliant, supporting on well-being issues. That's another issue that we could talk about for a long time, because mental health and well-being is a relatively new concept for Chinese people to actually openly talk about. It's very much of you just get on with it. But when students are here, these services are provided to them, but they probably don't know that when they might need to reach out to these services or when they might need to use them. And then you've got the careers teams, which I've already touched on. Great advice and information and guidance on career support and employment support. So this is quite a short bit because I wanted to put it out to you guys, because for me, how I find I'm helping them is I'm not helping students with the CV, the assessment centres, all that sort of stuff that the university careers team provide them with. And I don't provide all these other things such as, what the international team and mental health and well-being teams provide them with. But I'm looking at that transition phase between China and the UK and how I can prepare them for their time in the UK, so they can use their time here and maximize it to actually prepare for their careers. And I've already touched on this, and George, thank you for helping me with this, but the book that I've done touches on this, and the feedback that I've got through the research and after doing the book is that students are saying they wish they'd had this book, before they came to the UK, or even 17 years ago or 20 odd years ago, as my cousin said. It's surprising that things haven't changed. These things that I talk about in this book are very basic. When you see it, you'll think, yes, this is actually it. But it is so basic that if they don't have these foundation, it's going to be really difficult. And it hasn't changed for the last 20 odd years, which is quite sad. So another thing is that, you know, careers practitioners really think it's great because it actually sets them up for using the career services. If Chinese students do some of the things that I mentioned in this book, by the time they go to the career services, they're in such a great position. They're like UK students, they're like the other international students. They can actually hit the ground running with that career prep, that job application. You've got the basics that you can put onto your CV. You've got the English communication skills, so you can go through the assessment process well, and it puts them in a great space. And I've spoken to a lot of other university practitioners, and some of the things that they've said that we could, you know, we should be doing is maybe using KPIs a bit more, measuring graduate outcomes of international students, lobbying for more resources in university, because that's one thing that is, you know, always short, obviously, but the amount of students we have from China doesn't kind of relate to the amount of support that's sometimes given at some universities. And they all talk about supporting the transition more, but who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for supporting that transition? Because, you know, everyone, the international teams, the wellbeing teams, careers teams have their bits that they do. Who is actually responsible for supporting their transition? And the final thing is, how can we adapt and tailor the support that we've had so that we don't have to reinvent it, but just adapt it? So I'm going to finish there and throw it out again to see whether you guys have any other things that you think that we could be doing, or any comments.
I think one of the comments, the questions that I have, I think when we're looking more towards the employability of the Chinese students and preparing students for work and their employment future, and if they're returning to China, would you say, would you comment a little, are there any differences in the ways that a student should prepare for work returning to China and or staying in the UK? What would there be any sort of differences in the advice required, or would there be different focuses on preparation? I mean, so for example, how well received is if they're returning to work in China, how important are the extracurricular activities? Things like this, are they differently perceived?
For me, when I talk to students about this, because most of them will go back to China, it's actually using things like extracurricular activities like sports or clubs or positions of responsibility, work experience, volunteering work, using the skills, using those experience to develop skills such as your soft skills that you need that are actually transferable to back in China and in the UK. So I work with them on building their own personal attributes, their values, and what the soft skills are that are required in any industry, in anywhere that you can actually transfer. So communication skills, problem thinking skills, critical thinking, agility, all these sorts of things are actually things that you can apply back in China. So it's not about that tick box, I'm president of the student society, or I've done 6 months of work experience here. It's actually about, what did you gain out of it? What did you develop out of it to apply back to the workplace, wherever you are in the world, whether it be in the UK or China? You can bring these. And Chinese employers want, now a degree is not enough. Imagine 8 million Chinese students getting into that job market every year. It used to be that a degree was enough, and it used to be that a UK or overseas degree would set you apart. It's not enough anymore. You have to develop, demonstrate that you can do those other things, like all those soft skills that I've mentioned and more. So for me, when I speak to and work with my students going back to China, it is definitely about how you can bring that out in your CV. Yes, you can put, I've worked X, Y, and Z, but the things that you need to put under that is bringing out your soft skills, your positions of responsibility, and how you've actually made a difference, what the outcomes are. So it's definitely, whether you're staying in the UK or going to China, it's the same preparation, I think.
Okay, My next question, I think, is quite specific again to the UK. I know we've recently been seeing that there are the opportunities for Chinese students to work in the UK for, I believe, is it up to 1 or 2 years
2 years,
before
yeah.
returning to the UK. And I've had in some discussions, it seemed a little interesting as the students, if they choose to study in the UK for 2 years and then return to China, would they be at a disadvantage in some ways because they would be? There's been some commentary that a student who's got 2 years of work experience in the UK in a British company, they would then be entering the job market in China, and they would be competing against others with experience in Chinese companies. So what would be your take on that?
It absolutely depends on what sort of job they're going for. So if they're going for jobs in companies that are actually going to think of the skills that they learn in the UK, the skills that they actually develop whilst working in a UK based company, absolutely is going to be an advantage to them. But if they're going back to a company that actually prefers someone with the skills and experience that they gain from a Chinese company, then that's going to be a different matter. But I don't think that it would be wasted at all, because at the end of the day, if they're here for 2 years working and they get, I think the important thing is that they don't wait until they finish their master's or their degree to actually find a job, because then they're a year behind. They've got to actually try and get a degree, get their job, so that they make use of those 2 years. I think that's really important, because that 2 years experience is going to be great for them when they go back. But then again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. It depends what sort of organization you're going to work for. If you're going to work for a state-run organization, maybe it might not be as valuable or seen as good. So, and those that are working in the UK and want to stay here and work are probably doing it because they want more of an international career.
That's good. That's so great. I think it's also one of those. Obviously, this is a topic that there is so much to learn. I mean, obviously, when we look at the different, for myself, learning about the employment or the job seasons in China and the way that those work, and if you miss the graduation one, then you're competing against everyone rather than just the students, just other graduates, excuse me. So, I mean, there's a whole amount to learn, and I think but we don't have any more time. We are running out to the end of the time, as I say. This is a topic I'm also equally passionate about, and I think we'll finish up by just reminding everyone about that there is, if you want to learn more, of course, you can go to Amazon or any reputable bookshop and buy Suzanna's book, University Student Handbook from China to the UK by Suzanna Tan. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you most of all, Suzanna, for sharing giving us your time and your expertise and your experience.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. And anyone, if you'd like to reach out to me, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn very easily. Just type in Suzanna Tan. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the discussion. It's been great.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.